Welcome back to Briggs on Books. We're talking to authors from all over the world. Can you believe it? Paris, South Africa, Canada, and even a few authors from right here, the United States of America, such as our next author who is joining us now, Cecelia Tichi. I got a name right for the first time this week. We rehearsed it. Cecelia Tichi. And you wrote a whole bunch of books, by the way. But here's a picture of Cecelia with a bunch of her books. And I'm going to, as we talk, I'm going to pop the book covers up on the screen. But welcome, Cecelia.
Thank you, Mike Briggs. Great to be here. How's the Central Valley today?
It's hot again, believe it or not.
Oh.
By the way, I asked your permission because I didn't want to embarrass myself, but you said, no, there's no bad questions. A lot of your books are about the Gilded Age. What is the Gilded Age?
Well, in time frame, it's usually thought to be right after the Civil War until World War I. So we have several decades, the late 1800s, the early 1900s, some dated a little forward, a little afterward. But the title was conferred by a novel by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner, this Twain's first long fiction, and it stuck. It's interesting that other names for that period, the age of energy, the age of steel and steam, the age of enterprise. But the Gilded Age stuck, I think, because here was the glitter shining on the top, but underneath there was a lot of darkness to be explored. And that novel did plow into some of the problems of that whole era. And I would say a lot of historians have been reluctant to take on the title, The Gilded Age, simply because it encompasses so much that you could just drown in it. There's labor rights, there's industrialization, machines, railroads, all of this, and of course, tenements and people living hand to mouth and even worse. So it's a big topic.
Does it represent the whole nation or just the South or just the North?
It's interesting. It really represents, I think, pretty much all of the United States, including the devastated South trying to rebuild the New South. But the English UK version is the Edwardian era, and that's Prince Edward, soon to be crowned when his mother, Queen Victoria, passes away. Yeah. And over in France, it's the Belle Epoque, a beautiful period. So there were some connections, and in fact, the very rich Americans, the Mrs. Astors, the Vanderbilts, they went to the UK for, say, pheasant hunting in the autumn, or to Paris to be fitted for the next season's gowns. And so there was a connection. It's interesting that the servants and the Fifth Avenue mansions, the servants who tended to the children were very often speakers of French or German, so that the children would learn those languages that they needed to know as cosmopolitan sophisticates, even though Grandpa might have earned his fortune in copper out in Minnesota, or pork, processing those critters in Cincinnati. But the Gilded Agers, the elites, were eager to distance themselves from such humble beginnings.
Yes. By the way, I don't want to get too far off the topic of your books, but your email said vanderbilt.edu. Did that mean you were teaching at Vanderbilt University?
That means I still have connections there. I'm emerita, meaning I have retired from the classroom, and I will tell you that just as, and I'm swallowing up our interview time here, but just let me say, Vanderbilt was ready to go on spring vacation, and it was the spring of 2020, and I said, look, students, there's a virus out there. Now, pay some attention to public health experts and to infectious disease experts. I said, after all, if you're sick, who do you want at your bedside? Dr. Fauci or Vice President Pence? And we all laughed, Mike, and that was the last face-to-face sentence I ever spoke after a long time of teaching, because we all went on remote after that, and that was a whole other thing.
What did you teach?
I taught American literature, and I taught something that's called American Studies. Those of us who asked I would call it some historical questions about literature or art or history, we would gather and find out that maybe what we wanted to know was not in a Mark Twain book, but maybe was in a painting by John Singer Sargent.
Yeah.
And so those of us who would gather, scholars in art history, but always Americana. So this is what I sometimes say, Americana. But if you're going to write historical fiction, as I have turned to after many scholarly endeavors, you better be accurate. You better look up what you're about to say. Data matters, and there will be readers who will know.
Yep.
And once you've got false steps in a novel, you disqualify yourself.
You lose the audience. I'm one who's constantly researching throughout any book I read, so I do that a lot. By the way, I put up here the title of some of your works, the Val and Roddy DeVere Gilded Age series.
Yes.
Now, was I close in the pronunciation?
That's absolutely right. They're based on real historical characters. Valentine Michael DeVere, is based on Evelyn Walsh McLean, who grew up in the Rocky Mountain mining camps, where her papa was trying with his pick and shovel to find something in the mountains that were thought to be played out. There was a day when he drew her near and whispered in her ear, "Daughter, I've struck gold." And Walsh did strike gold. And his daughter, Evelyn, who grew up in those mining camps, soon became not only an heiress, but a very socially prominent one. She, at one point in her life, owned the Kohinoor diamond. Here's a point about her. Here's why my character is based on Evelyn Walsh McLean. She always remembered where she came from. She said, "I sleep on satin sheets, but I remember those bearskin rugs unders in sub-zero weather, in itchy woolen suits." And she was the only one in Newport where the wealthy built their cottages mansion-sized, calling them cottages. She was the only one who knew all her servants' names and something about her. And so she's my Val, a silver heiress, and she brings the fortune to her Roddy, love of her life, who's a fifth-generation Knickerbocker New Yorker, whose family is going bust because Papa's investments have tanked. Roddy, during his teenage years, has pursued a hobby down the block from the Barnum Museum, where young New Yorkers go and they see the Egyptian mummies and the whale's tooth, and it gets tiresome. But down the block, there's a bartender mixing something new, mixed drinks called cocktails. And Roddy's very interested, and he wants to learn to do it. Unfortunately, his parents suspect that he's become addicted. And so the parents go west to Virginia City, the silver mining boom town, and Roddy meets Val. And they strike up the romance. And they will live in New York. They will vacation in Newport. And in the summer of 1898, a close friend of theirs is at risk of being murdered. and they take on the protection of their friend to save her life. This is in Newport, and that is the first of my Val and Roddy DeVere Gilded Age series books. What? It is A Gilded Death.
A Gilded Death. I'm going to see if I could get that that cover. I've been putting the covers up as you're talking, but here's if I get the cover. There it is, A Gilded Death. There's the cover. Is this the first one then?
It's the first one.
Okay.
And then the DeVeres, after the summer season, they're back in New York, and what's happening? Young women are being strangled, murdered in Central Park, which is right across from their Fifth Avenue chateau, and they get involved with that. And then
there's a cover, Gilded Central Park. What's the full title?
Murder in Gilded Central Park. You know, and then the year spins around. It's January, and it's the first performance at the new Metropolitan Opera House, and in the box beside theirs, something has happened because blood seeps under the partition, and they find themselves drawn into the question of who was murdered, why was he murdered, and how is it that Val's jewelry makes her a suspect in the murder. And Mike, let me just say, it's very important that Val and Roddy have a personal connection to what's gone wrong. And every author of murder mysteries, I'll call them murder mysteries, whether they are more like Agatha Christie or whether they're out on the bloodiest, awfulest end of the spectrum, they're all based on the idea, and you know this, that something has gone amiss in culture and society. Something has to be put right. Either a better past needs to be restored, or a better future has to be framed and anticipated. And I think the reason that so many readers are attracted to mystery fiction is exactly on that basis. Something's gone wrong, who can fix it, and what are the ins and outs, and what's the danger? And of course, danger lurks.
I feel like besides getting a great story, multiple great stories, we're also going to get an understanding of the Gilded Age, because you're going to refer to real life people and places and things from that time.
That's right. My couple have a private rail car that they ride. They're going to send a friend off to Yellowstone Park, and they're going to ride in their own car as far as Chicago in a book that I titled A Deadly Gilded Free Fall. And they're going to go to the park that hosted a historical exposition, the Columbian Exposition of 1893-94. That famous Ferris wheel will reappear in 1904 at St. Louis. Meet me in St. Louis, Louis. But Val and Roddy are tracking a murder case, and Val will visit Jane Addams' Hull House, one of the first social work centers in America. Jane Addams, who was on to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Yep. So in every one of my Gilded Age, my Val and Roddy Gilded Age novels, there will be historical accuracy, places, people, and I will base those characters on the documentary reports of what they were like, because they are not to be falsified. And there's one sentence that Val's going to hear in Jane Addams's Hull House. She's taken on a tour, and her guide says to her, "Mrs. DeVere, until our country becomes fully civilized, we need philanthropy." And that's a sentence Mike, I didn't plan that sentence. It somewhere came out.
Came out.
Yeah.
That's good.
And it came out for my household as it went into the book, and it is so true.
It's a great line. We're going to run out of time in a minute, but I wanted to touch on, we have your website on the screen, ccbooks.com. And
Yes.
what will our viewers find there?
What they'll find are all of the Val and Roddy DeVere Gilded Age series books. There are 5 now. There'll be a 6th one right after the first of the year.
Mm-hmm.
They will also see my other books, a book on Jack London, an author I much admire, and they'll be seeing some cocktail books from the era. After all, there was Roddy making cocktails.
I like that.
Gilded Age cocktails, and Jazz Age cocktails, and mid-century cocktails from America's atomic age. They're all there.
Nice. Ms. Cecelia Tichi, I want more time to talk to you. They only give me, I'm going to tell my producers next time I want more time. I'd love to ask you more about the Vanderbilts and the university and your time reading and researching. Just know when I'm reading your books, I'm the researching alongside your writing because I love to do that.
Welcome to it, Mike Briggs.
Last thoughts for our viewers?
Last thoughts, you know, in the pages of a book, you can live a life of travel, time travel, that is so enriching. And if a writer is pretty good, the writer will give you little presents on every page.
On every page. That's nice. Our guest, Cecelia Tichi. For our viewers, stick around. We're going to have another author coming up right after this, but this is one of my favorite ones right here, Miss Cecelia Tichi. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike Briggs.